Welcome to The Real Story with Jeanne Ives. Today we're turning to Illinois' financial situation because Governor Pritzker is bragging about having long-term budgetary influence in making Illinois a more solvent state. Is that true? Well, we turn to Shelia Weinberg. She is the founder and CEO of Truth in Accounting, and she has been tracking not just Illinois' financial situation, but the situation in a number of different states as it relates to their bonding indebtedness, as it relates to their pension debt indebtedness, as it relates to taxpayers and how much taxpayers are actually on the hook for all this government largesse. Shelia, thank you for joining me on my program.
Oh, thanks for having me on, Jeanne. And, before we get into the details, I just want to emphasize that, we may talk about a lot of financial stuff, a lot of large numbers, but the most important thing is that we are in a representative form of government. And my concern is that citizens just aren't being told the truth about their finances, so they can't really actively, knowledgeably participate in their government. How would you know what tax and spending policy you should implement if you don't know the true financial condition of your government, and also even who to go and vote for if you don't know the true finances?
Yes, because it seems like everybody looks at their own individual situation in one respect and we thought that at least in this last election cycle that the economy was going to be the biggest determinant as to how people voted. It doesn't appear that's what happened. And I have to turn to my own intuition on this and say, I think it's because many people look at their own individual situation and say, well, at least I have a job. At least my kids are back in school and they're unmasked. At least my wife is able to work as well, or whatever the situation. They look at it individually rather than collectively and understand exactly where this could head for them one way or the other. I mean, will taxes go up or not? They've kind of become accustomed, unfortunately, in the state of Illinois and a little bit numb to taxes always going up, especially property taxes. And so I think that that's sort of what happened here. I think there's a lot of lack of knowledge, and that's why I really appreciate your work in Truth in Accounting.
Well, and the other issue is that the state does have a balanced budget requirement. So as spending increases, unfortunately, that would mean that taxes have to go up. But what happens in Illinois is spending increases, but they don't include the cost in the balanced budget requirement. So therefore, as spending is increasing, they're not having to raise taxes. They're actually able to give people more services and benefits than they're paying for in taxes. And so the whole accountability just goes away. And, would Illinois voters make a different voting decision if they had to raise taxes to meet the balanced budget requirement to fund the spending that they're making?
Well, because in many cases, a lot of the spending that they're doing and the revenue that they're calling revenue is actually borrowings, or it's shorting particular systems like the pension system and not paying the full actuarial amount and only a statutorial amount, which is much less than, for example, last year, the actuaries came up with a plan, said if you want to be 100% funded by X date, well, Illinois last year should have put $4 billion more into pension funds than they did. But they've made rules and laws saying that they only have to submit a statutorial amount. Now, this has gotten Illinois in trouble in the past, but before we look there, let's look at your report, because I think it was so well done. It was short and succinct and understandable to the average casual reader. And you wrote the Truth in Accounting analysis of Pritzker's economic report for 2022. Because, of course, he put out a flashy press release on November 14th saying that and let me find that one right here. So he released a 5-year forecast showing projected long-term budgetary deficits are nearly eliminated in the state of Illinois. Now, that's quite a statement, because it doesn't appear that way to you. And so you took that press release and you took it apart, and you essentially write that he claimed that Illinois is in its best fiscal shape in decades. The state's projected long-term budget of deficits will be eliminated, and that they're going to put and the extra money will be put into the pension systems. And then you say he's absolutely not accounting for the fact that Illinois is still $200 billion in debt, that our long-term deficits will continue because the state will continue to shortchange its pension systems, as I discussed just earlier, and that essentially the money added to the rainy day fund exists even with the extra money. The state is not paying the minimum on the pension system's credit cards. And I mean, you just go through the numbers here so clearly and essentially saying if Illinois is in the best fiscal shape in decades, that's akin to a person saying they are in good financial shape if you do not look at the $200,000 that has been accumulated on their credit cards. I mean, bringing it down to the kitchen table is really what people need to understand.
Yeah, and they seem to be just misleading the public with just different wording. It's like they look at their cash flow, which might look good because tax revenue is better than they anticipated. They got tons of money from the federal government, and then everything looks fine, but you can make your cash flow look good by shorting your pensions by $4 billion. And if they would have had to, I know you're not a tax person, but again, we have this balanced budget requirement, and if they would have had to raise taxes by $4 billion to properly fund the pensions, then we don't look that good, and we're not running these fictitious surpluses, and the deficit is not going down.
Well, so embedded in and I actually posted this on my Facebook, and we're going to put it up on my personal page. We're going to put it up on Breakthroughs. We're going to put up your report again so people can access it. And inside there, you also link to the Truth in Accounting's report on the financial condition of the state of Illinois. And you gave us a grade of F. And by the way, it's great to see that you're working with the University of Denver now, too, to put out these comprehensive financial reports on all of these states, which is really very informative because it's so succinct and easy to read for the average person. And essentially, we have an F. And the bottom line is Illinois would need $49,500 from each of its taxpayers to pay all its bills. And
that it's
are we
accumulated
third
to date?
from
Nothing in the future, just what's accumulated to date.
Yeah, this is just to date. And what are we, the worst of the states, or third from the bottom, or tied?
We're third from the bottom. You can your listeners can go to our Truth, our data-z.org website. They can click on Illinois and find the Illinois breakdown of their financial condition. I think New Jersey and Connecticut actually come out worse than Illinois on a per taxpayer basis, but being third worst is not a good thing. And we do give them an F, and I believe you did want to talk about the credit ratings. And the reason that we started grading the states was because the credit ratings, what governments use and elected officials use this credit rating for, saying, hey, look, we're doing great financially, is not the purpose of a credit rating. A credit rating is just whether a government is going to it has the ability to pay its bonds. So Illinois, they plan to borrow money, then they're going to put $1 billion of that money into a rainy day fund, which could be used to pay the bonds. So therefore, the credit ratings gave them a better rating. Our F grade is the risk to the taxpayers that they're going to have to pay future taxes to cover the finances that the bills that the state has already accumulated.
So it is interesting because these rating agencies, to some degree, hold all the cards in terms of whether or not lenders are willing to lend to bankrupt entities. And this when you talk about corporations, if they have a low bond rating, they're essentially going to be frozen out of the capital market, which really hurts their ability to expand operations or to at least continue doing what they're doing. Now, when it happens to a state, you're right, the state has an unlimited power to tax. So the bond ratings, while they rate these states low, what that simply means in many cases is not that lenders won't continue to lend. It means that lenders are going to demand a much higher interest rate. And so for many years, Illinois has paid what they call the Illinois penalty. And so even if you're sitting in a community that has a AAA bond rating because you're Wheaton or something like that, or Naperville with a large tax base and the ability, and you're running a system that's financially stable, even you, when you went to lend, because you reside in the state of Illinois, you paid a Illinois penalty for anything that you were lending, and there'd be upwards of 50 basis points. So I mean, that's a lot. That's a 0.5% easily, and so it doesn't mean that Chicago doesn't, even though they're still junk status. It doesn't mean that they aren't going to receive money. It just means that their taxpayers are going to pay more, and that the more that they bond out, the more that taxes will increase to cover that bet. So I think that, I don't know. And so it's essentially, though, Illinois kind of got caught in a problem. And could you bring the listeners up to date on this? Because you mentioned to me when we were talking before that this actual press release that Pritzker put out just 2 weeks ago could possibly be in violation of an SEC cease and desist letter that they sent Illinois in 2013 for essentially lying in bond offering information. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I'm an accountant, and I don't want to play a lawyer on on your podcast, but I did in 2013, Illinois was charged with municipal securities fraud, in their bond offerings, saying that although they reduced their pension contributions, they didn't disclose that they're still structurally underfunding their pension system. And so and other issues, and so they were charged with securities fraud, and so therefore they cleaned up their bond offerings. If you read their bond offerings, which as an accountant I've done, but they are pretty boring, so I wouldn't recommend everybody do it. But you can see where it says yes, we're underfunding our pension funds. But then in public statements like this, this press release that the governor just issued, they don't mention that they're structurally underfunding their pensions. And also when there was a press conference on the credit ratings going down, getting better. The governor, somebody in the press fortunately said, "Well, Governor, you're saying that things are getting better, but you're underfunding the pension system," and he came back and said, "No, we're funding it. We're doing the statutorily required contribution. That schedule is due to fund the pension system 90% over 50 years, and the SEC, cease and desist order clearly states that system does not fund the system 90% over 50 years. And in fact, one of the SEC officials called it a balloon payment on steroids. In the cease and desist order, I'll read directly from it. It says, although the state understood that the structural underfunding could risk the eventual exhaustion of the pension system, and the states likely would not be able to afford the level of contributions required under the statutorily funding, it does not disclose that the state's inability to make contributions increased the investment risk to the bondholders. And the state did not identify or discuss how the underfunding compromises the state's creditworthiness and increases its financial cost. So we already have, a cease and desist order that the state, theoretically should be following, but they're still referring to this structural statutory funding schedule that is just not.
It's not accurate. It's not accurate.
It's not a reality schedule. And so I'm kind of like, I don't understand why they continue to refer to that. And I also don't understand it, especially in light of a SEC staff legal bulletin that was issued on February 7th, 2020, that says that, no, it's any statement that you make applies to the anti-fraud provision. It's not just a bond offering. And again, it states that verbal statements made by municipal issuer officials, such as speeches, public announcements, interviews, press releases, the anti-fraud provision applies to those.
So do you plan on
So
pursuing this any further? Like going to a press conference, asking a more detailed question, following up with an email to them, maybe even having a legal entity get involved?
we're working on we are working on it internally right now, and trying to just decide what can be done about it. Would the SEC come back into Illinois and say that say, hey, you're not
Well, I mean, this
following
is
this?
important for voters because honestly, he's been spouting these same sort of lies, honestly, about the state's financial condition, all throughout the campaign. That's where he went.
My husband forbid me to watch his campaign commercial.
Well, I can understand. Well, you know what? Let's do a little something else here because I think it's great. Your data-z.org information is just incredibly useful, especially for people who care about public policy. Because there's nothing. I think one of the greatest things that we can do is offer the comparison. So I've called Indiana our slimmer, sexier sister. The state of Indiana, and I mean that in terms of its fiscal condition. And it's interesting because Indiana, in your same scorecard, received a B. And whereas Illinois taxpayers' share of its current debt, because its bills exceed its assets, is $49,500. Conversely, right next door, Indiana, each taxpayer's share of its surplus is $2,100. Yep. So they have a surplus in Indiana. They rated a B. They ranked 15 out of 50. We'll talk about number one here in a minute. But they're right next door. They're right next door. They have about half the economy we have in terms of its GDP. There's nothing different in terms of its weather. There's nothing different. I mean, they abut Lake Michigan like we do. Let me think. What else? We share a border. Terrain's pretty much the same. What is the deal?
Our Data-Z website, in addition to going into the individual states, we have a charting feature that says it's under charts and you can create your own charts. So I selected our neighbors. Tell me if I got them all. Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, and Wisconsin. Is there anybody else I should
Iowa,
select?
Missouri.
Oh, Iowa and Missouri. Okay. And then I just selected
Kentucky,
our taxpayer burden surplus. And then I just selected the current year, and I'll generate the chart again. And Illinois' number, as you say, is $49,500. The next state, the closest state, is Michigan, and you've heard their financial trouble with Detroit, but they're I hate to say only $8,800 per taxpayer. As you mentioned, Indiana's ahead of the game. Iowa is ahead. Each taxpayer's share of their surplus was $5,000. Missouri, their taxpayer burden is only $2,100, and Wisconsin's only $400. So, just comparing the states around us, Illinois is just in a lot worse shape than any others, than those states.
Do you find that any legislators you speak to are interested in this information?
We have people in various states, and we try to get them as you said, we have an easy to read report on each individual state, and I tell candidates, I think I mentioned to your team, go ahead and print it. It's open. Democrats and Republicans can print it. We're nonpartisan, and show your voters what's the true financial condition of the government. Now, again, it's not just us. If you look at the state's own audited financial statement, it shows that it needs more than $200 billion of money to pay the bills it's covered to date. So it's not that, I'm taking the numbers from the state's own audited financial statements. I'm not, in fact, their numbers are actually, their latest reported numbers are a little bit worse than ours.
Well, additionally, I think it was Moody's who at one point pegged our pension obligation itself at $250 billion, and I think it's on the records for about $145 billion right now. But I mean, at one point they had it, at 250.
Yeah, there's
so there's other ways that because of the way that
technical ways you can calculate it.
But you basically, and I love to do this too, is use your own government statistics to show exactly the state of affairs. And so there's no these are their numbers. I'm just reporting them to you in an understandable way and in a comparative way.
Yeah, and again, in relation to is the state they're shorting the pension system by $4 billion. That's from the state's own actuaries.
Yeah, exactly. It's actually right there in the Department of Insurance, believe it or not, is where they house a lot of the information on the pensions. You wouldn't expect it to be there, but that's where it is. And it's an open secret, so to speak. You can find this information. So
yeah, it's
they just don't want to talk about it in committees hearings. They don't want to talk about it on the House floor when they're dealing with their budget. They want to talk about any of this.
Well, and it makes it so that the citizens cannot hold them accountable.
Mm-hmm.
The 49 of the 50 states have a balanced budget requirement, as does the 75 most populated cities. And Vermont, just so you know, Vermont does not. And they have it for a great reason. A former U.S. Treasury official said it best. It's so that you have a balanced budget so the politicians can't spend, i.e. they're going to get a vote, without the pain of taxing, i.e. they're going to lose a vote. And that's how you hold them accountable. And if, in other states, as expenses, get worse and they have to raise taxes to cover those, then they might get voted out of office. Or if people think, hey, I'm paying this much in taxes, I'm not getting that good a deal, then they might vote them out of office. But we've lost that whole accountability in the state of Illinois because we're just, we just account, we record when they calculate the budget, they, as you mentioned, they record loan proceeds as revenue. They just don't put all the cost in, Previously, the state had billions of dollars of unpaid bills. Well, that was because if you got copies from a printer, if the state, had a printer print something for them, and they sent him, and the printer sent the state a bill, as long as the state didn't pay that bill, they didn't have to include that in the balanced budget requirement calculations. So they could balance the budget by just not paying bills, and that's what they've continually done with the state's pension liability. Pensions is
Right.
They've offered these employees the benefits. It's just like any other part of compensation. They've offered them the benefits. The employees have earned the benefits. The state's incurred a liability, but they just do not fund that as they go along like they should. But that has allowed them to expand government beyond what Illinois taxpayers are willing to pay for.
Well, and one of the first problems is, of course, that the way that they get around the balanced budget amendment is that the revenue number used is an estimate of revenue to be available, and that estimate can be, fuddled with.
Well, it's
so
not.
That's the
it's
deal.
not. I hate to correct you, but it's not revenue to be available.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
It's
Good point.
It's just
Good
funds
point.
available.
It's good funds available. That's right. So that could be borrowing or anything else. That's right. Yes.
It can be just anything that they want to, throw in there.
Yeah.
And during the pandemic, the state's doing so great that during the pandemic, I do not know why. Maybe you know better than I do. They did not go to the usual bond market to borrow money when there was all the other states, one other government in the whole United States were able to go to the bond market to get short-term cash to handle the pandemic. Illinois' financial situation was so poorly they did not go to the bond market. I don't know if the bond market just said, we're not going to give you money, or the interest rates were so high, or some other reason they couldn't go to the usual bond market. The Federal Reserve had to open up a special borrowing facility and lend Illinois the money, the emergency money that
and
it
we're
needed.
the only state to do that. We're the only state that took advantage of that and borrowed money. It's just
right. And
unreal.
then the Fed said during, the COVID relief money was supposed to be used for, COVID relief, I'm sorry. And it was not supposed to be used to pay down the debt, especially this Federal Reserve debt. But just mysteriously, after the state got the COVID relief money, they were able to pay off the debt early. But they didn't. They used, and their argument was, well, we used tax revenue versus the money we got from the federal government. Just like when the federal government gave them the money, they put little F's on the money, and they made sure they didn't grab that money.
Right, exactly. Right, exactly. It's just ridiculous on its face. Everybody should be able to see through that. Okay, so I just one other thing, because this conversation kind of sparked something else that's going on. Right now, Illinois is getting ready today. They have a bill in the works to essentially pay back the entire $1.35 billion that they still owe to the federal government for federal unemployment taxes. So that is going to get paid back, and there's a sweetheart deal that was done. Not really a sweetheart deal. It was a negotiated deal between labor and management business, and they all got on board. And essentially what's going to happen is they're going to pay back this money so that they don't incur a second $114 million penalty from the federal government for not paying back the FUTA fund before. Okay, so they're going to do that, but it's going to create a rate increase on employers for the next 5 years. And the only reason business agreed to this negotiated deal, from my understanding, is the fact that if they weren't to agree with it, the unemployment system would essentially get into arrears again, and that would create a higher rate hike in the near future. And so they're trying to avoid that. So, it's just another way that Illinois has, again, taken borrowings from the federal government, incurred penalties / interest as a result of not paying that back in a timely manner, and obviously used that money that could have been used, ARPA funds could have been used to pay that back, that was allowed, use that money for other things. Like, Lori Lightfoot's Universal Basic Income Project.
Yeah, when they're on the verge of, in essence, bankruptcy.
Right.
It reminds me of when the state, when the state got the credit rating upgrades. Now, did Moody's or Fitch, did they just come to the state and just say, oh, you're doing a lot better, so we're going to give you an upgrade? No. You get a bond rating when you go out to borrow money. So if the state was doing so well, then why does it need to go out and borrow money? And then then part of the state's plan was to put, they're going to borrow money at, $1.6 billion, and then they're going to put $1 billion of that into the rainy day fund. Well, it's like, well, why are you borrowing money to put in a rainy day fund? So you're gonna incur interest on that borrowed money. It's like, but you're just going to put that in your savings account.
Yeah. Well, here's the deal. Do you happen to know the interest rate that they're paying on that? And do you know that rate as it compares to other AAA rated states?
No, I don't know that.
Well, that's something I'm definitely going to look into, because that would be interesting to know. Because I know at one point, by the way, we're still an outlier. Even though we've had an upgrade in our bond rating, we are still the worst of the worst. And we're the worst by a long shot. It used to be that we were 3 times worse than the next worst state when it went to go borrow money in the interest rate that we had to pay. I am very curious what it is now with this slight upgrade, but I imagine we're still much worse off than the best rated states. So,
yeah.
All right. Well, hey, Shelia, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate you looking into this, and I hope that you actually do go a little bit further and find out if Pritzker's press release actually violates the SEC order from 2013. That would be very interesting. And it's alarming to me, absolutely alarming to me, that it takes people like you and organizations like Truth in Accounting to ferret out the truth. I mean, where has the mainstream media been on reporting about the fiction that he wrote in his press release?
Well,
Nowhere.
and also, it's frustrating when we issue a press release. We do not do any tax or spending policy. I'm not for lower taxes, higher taxes, increased spending. We just want the accounting and budgeting done correctly. And when we highlight, the facts that need to be highlighted, then Cranes, said we're a conservative, conservative operation. It's like, no, we don't. I'm not for any tax or spending policy, but they go ahead and attack us as I guess you wouldn't consider that as an attack, but pigeonhole us into
Right.
a certain thing. So then our message is discounted because we're looked at as one side or the other when we do our best not to promote any tax or spending policy increase in as you can tell from the beginning of this conversation, it's like we're not taxing the citizens of Illinois. If we truly balance the budget, taxes would have to go up. So you could say that we're actually for tax increases, which we're not. We're just for truly balancing your budget.
Well, for it or against it, people are going to get hit hard with a 5% property tax levy from their school boards. There's no doubt that's coming. So while the state may play this game a little bit longer and not increase your taxes or fees, they actually should give you money back at this point with all the slush fund money they received from the federal government and more to come, especially in that infrastructure bill. They should be handing back taxes, abating taxes and giving it back to this. That's not going to happen, and it's not going to happen at the local level either. You can predict that you are going to have a property tax increase as these schools spend and tax to the max. So it's not a good situation here in Illinois. People need to wake up and pay attention. And if you really do care about your future bottom line and your children, then you'll start to pay attention to people like Shelia Weinberg from Truth in Accounting.
Yep, go to our truthinaccounting.org website or our data-c.org website, and obviously we're a nonprofit, so contributions would be appreciated.
Yes, and it's Giving Tuesday, so everybody get online and read about Sheila's report and appreciate her work, and if you can, give a little something.
Thank you, Jeannie.
Thank you for coming on my program. We appreciate you.